one, congratulations on the book, dude.
Oh, thank you.
I bought my copy yesterday. I am very much looking forward to reading it.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Thing two, related to the last conversation, is you were talking about the studies where they modified the tail feathers of the different birds, and
Yep.
there is a whole field of research which is called research into animal supernormal stimuli, which this is the it's fascinating. We're constantly every animal is reacting to stimuli like the female birds looking at the longer tail feathers. And there is I believe, Swedish or Finnish psychologist that did these experiments where he noticed he had these like fish set up in a fish tank that were near a window. And these fish react aggressively to males that have like a red stomach on them. And he noticed that the fish started flipping out when the postal truck would roll up because the postal truck is red. And he was like, are the
Oh,
fish getting mad at the mail truck? So he started running all these experiments, and over the course of his career, started figuring out that for a lot of animal species, there's almost no upper bound on the stimuli that we'll react to. And so, like, if you make a lot of birds will look for like a baby bird's mouth is just a wide open red thing. So
yeah,
you
I've seen
can
that before.
yeah, comically fake looking baby birds, and then mother birds will neglect their own children to feed the supernormally red mouth. The theory that's kind of emerging out of this stuff and has been forming over like the last 30 years is that this is basically why humans are dealing with stuff like porn addiction and gambling addiction and scrolling on TikTok, that these
Mm.
things have gotten really good at hijacking our supernormal stimuli and activating the right chemicals in the right way. So that was kind of
Okay.
cool.
I've heard the thing about the birds and they have the red spot inside their mouths. I've heard
Yeah.
of that before. What you just said, I've had that thought for years, especially as a teacher. I'm like, I'm competing against phones and we can't win,
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
But that term hypernormative stimuli,
Super
I
normal.
don't, supernorm, okay. I'm not sure if I'd ever heard that before. I got something really fascinating about birds. I cannot. I looked through so many because I'm writing another book and I wanted to talk about this, but I can't freaking find the original study. I know I read it in a book, but I don't remember which one. But there was this bird. It was a ground nesting bird, and the biologists were watching it, and they were really perplexed because there was this one bird that kept having clutches of eggs every season, and she pecked all her chicks to death every single year. And they were like, "What the hell is going on? This doesn't make any sense." And then they found out she's deaf. So the bird is biologically pre-programmed that anything that doesn't sound like a chick, one of my chicks, is danger and
Interesting.
attack it. And it was incapable of knowing that those are its own chicks because that whatever instinct overrides everything else.
That's fascinating. Did you hear? There's a video that's been making the rounds on TikTok here. I think Austin made the video about how we have never identified anywhere, including in like, obviously previous like old medical records are very unreliable because human society used to have some pretty batshit ideas about what made people crazy. But as far as we're aware, we have zero documented cases globally of a blind person who was born blind developing schizophrenia. And this seems very interesting because
Huh.
if we could find one or investigate why that doesn't happen, it seems to be that there is something highly correlatory about the ability to hear and schizophrenia. And of course, one of the main symptoms of kind of advanced schizophrenia is the auditory hallucinations. I've been thinking about that a lot, about how we have no documented cases of that. It seems we don't fully understand the way that we internalize the kind of language and audio processes.
That's really amazing. Did you hear about the I got two things. There's a there's a book called Blueprint by Robert Plomin. Have you ever heard about it?
I've not.
It's really good and it's only like this. It's like about as long as my book. It's not super long. It's really cool. It's about those what are they called, genome wide association studies or snippets and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It focuses on adoptive twin studies for the major thing because it's the nature nurture thing. And he basically said at the end of it is like it's literally like 50-50 across the board for almost every single thing. But the
Hmm.
problem is the environment, that's the nurture whatever, is always random and you can barely you can't predict anything about it. So that's why twins, even though they grow up in different households, end up being extraordinarily alike, because that 50% genetic component is basically going to always be there and shape things. And yes, their lived experience will be powerful, but it's so random that you can't predict it. And like adopted children never end up anything like their adoptive parents. The only things that are strongly correlated are like political and religious beliefs. And
Mhm.
that's mostly because of like relentless, I don't want to call it brainwashing, but I don't know what else to call it.
Social conditioning.
So yeah. Um,
Yeah.
that's really fascinating. The other thing was, what the hell were we talking about?
Super normal stimuli, birds.
No, what you were talking about right before I said the thing about blueprint was,
The no documented cases of a blind person born
oh
blind.
yeah. Did you see, I think you did, but did you see a thing about people that are born blind but then regain their sight later in life? They can't predict what a round or a square which one will feel
Yes,
pointy. That
yes, that's
one's,
so fascinating to me.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I never. Now that I think about it, I never really finished my thought about the blueprint thing, because he also talks a lot about schizophrenia in there, and how, when the Human Genome Project was started, people were like, yes, we're going to find the genes for all of these like mental disorders, and it turns out that there aren't any. There are no gene. There is not a gene for schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or anything like that. And it's actually kind of funny because he's like, look, schizophrenia, it's a spectrum disorder. A lot of you are a little bit schizophrenic,
Yeah.
because like the symptoms include like paranoia and disconnected thoughts and
Mhm.
things like that. And it's like, well, yeah, I guess we've all been there, kind of. Another really fascinating thing was that there are like genetic markers that are like high predictors for certain things, definitely. Um, but it turns out that uh, bipolar disorder and, oh shoot, what's the other one? Is it schizophrenia? No, it's not schizophrenia. It's bipolar disorder, and actually, it might be schizophrenia. I'm not
Schizophrenia
100%
is
sure.
clinically considered to have like a genetic predominance.
Yeah, but I can't. I know one is bipolar. I can't remember what the other one is. I think it might actually be schizophrenia, but I'm not 100%. But they have the exact same genetic markers. And this was really, the geneticists and the psychologists were all like, that doesn't make any sense. Those are the two most, whatever they are, they're the two most widely diagnosed uh, mental conditions or whatever, but they're so completely different. And
Yeah.
so they thought they couldn't possibly be related. So it turns out that you can be genetically predisposed to something, and it manifests in two completely different conditions depending on that environmental factor. It's a fantastic book. Everybody
Yeah,
should read it.
I just added it to the Goodreads list, so it's on there now. Um, it's kind of interesting. The thing that makes me think of there's kind of so I'm diagnosed autistic, and there's some studies that I find really interesting that find that, and like any mental health studies, these vary from study to study, but some studies show that that ASD, which is autism spectrum disorder, and ADHD are up to 60% comorbid in Western countries. And what I find really interesting about this is that there's kind of now a growing movement within autism literature about asking the question, if these two things are 80% comorbid, is it possible that it's just the same shit and we've drawn a line in the sand? And the reason the line doesn't seem to be a very good predictor is because it's not a real line. It's just, a categorization problem thing. And it makes me
Yeah.
wonder how often or how where else within in terms of mental health categorization, because the human mind is so kind of seemingly inherently nebulous and hard to categorize, yet humans have this almost religious yearning for a kind of Aristotelian cutoff for every possible thing, which for good
Yeah.
reason. It's, categorization is a useful tool, but um, I think sometimes we push it perhaps a bit too far.
Yeah. The necessitation that there must be one kind of this and two kinds of that. And it has to, the, a very long time ago, it was, well, there's got to be seven of everything, right? Well, if not seven, then three, right? Oh,
Yeah,
yes, because there must be that kind of order and harmony in the universe.
yeah,
Sevens and threes.
of course.
and true binaries for everything or whatever.
I'll now launch into a 20-minute monologue about Nikola Tesla and the power of 369. I'm summoning the ghost of Blitz. Um,
Yeah, he doesn't like Tesla.
no, he doesn't. I've been on a few of the streams where he's like, Tesla's a fucking loser, debating.
Yeah, I didn't know about the pigeon thing. That
Really?
was fascinating. But this reminds me of this is one of the most hilarious jokes of all time. And I first heard it years ago. It has nothing to do with Tesla. But from now on, I'm gonna attribute it as a quote from Nikola Tesla. So here's the joke. Did you know pigeons die after mating?
No.
Well, the one I fucked did.
That's so good. That's so good.
So
It reminds
from
me.
now on, I will just write that in quotes in the Nikola Tesla 1911, or I don't know when he died. I can't remember.
I think late 1800s. I'm not sure. That's fucking
It's
hilarious.
such a bad, just such a
That's
horrible
terrible.
joke.
It reminds me of
But it's so funny.
the one. I've been learning German for about 2 years. There's one joke that I know in German that I find particularly funny. I'll tell it in English. But the joke is that Peter and his grandfather Dieter are sitting on a hill, and his grandfather says, "Peter, do you see all these houses out here? I built all of those houses with my bare hands, brick by brick. But nobody calls me Peter the house builder. Okay, and you see that church over there? I cut and mortise and tenon all the wood for that church myself. Nobody calls me Peter the church builder. And you see that wall? I laid that wall brick by brick myself. Nobody calls me Peter the wall builder. But you fuck a pig once and suddenly..."
You're the pig fucker.
That's a good
Oh,
joke.
that's funny. Yeah, that's not fair. That's
No,
in
no, bad
psychology
rep.
we call that a master status. Like you're the the one thing about you, the most you thing about you, and yeah, you fuck one pig and you're gonna be the pig fucker, even if you dedicate your entire life to something else.
Well, I love when conversations, especially like philosophical conversations, they'll dive into the realm where somebody's trying to essentially put you in the position of like proving a negative about yourself, and then I'll just turn that around and be like, "Prove to me that you've never fucked a goat," and that tends to be a strong rhetorical position to argue from.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I asked a guy once, what the hell? We were talking about it was Angel. I don't know if you know who Angel Investor is, but he's
No.
very listless and always wrong. But God, what is he? He says you're a three-dimensional being who doesn't understand time. That's what Hubert Yaki says. Blah 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 blah. And so you can't be an atheist. It makes no logical sense. All this dumb stuff. But he was can't remember what he was arguing. So I asked him to prove that he's not a figment of my imagination, and he couldn't do it, and he got really mad.
That's funny.
He got really
So
mad.
the original reason that I requested to join was to talk about free will, and then after I hit request, so I forget. Did you and I already talk about this, or was that me and Blitz?
I think, wow.
If it
I-
happened, it was a long.
Last time you and I talked, P Star was up here, and you guys were talking about it was a conversation about determinism. And
True.
I just kind of, yeah, I think Blitz was there because I was kind of hanging out in the back. And at one point I said, well, I'm a level 54 barbarian. And
Yes.
nobody acknowledged it at all. And I was like,
Okay.
okay. I was trying
Yeah,
to be
no,
funny,
you're right.
guys, but whatever.
It was me and Blitz on your channel, and
Yeah.
we were talking about quantum superdeterminism.
Yeah.
Okay, so then maybe this will be useful if you want to take the bait on this. We don't have to if you don't want to, but I have been thinking a lot about free will and determinism recently, and then it kind of started more from a physics perspective, and as the more I've chewed on it, I think my focus on it has shifted more to a philosophical perspective, mainly because as part of trying to answer the question of like, how deterministic is the universe really, I started diving more into kind of quantum science than I had before. And the more I did that, I just kept arriving back at like, I don't get me wrong, like I have opinions about which interpretations of QM are right, but in the end of the day, they all produce exactly the same predictions to every possible measurement. There has never been an experiment that gives credence to one and not the others. So it's kind of just a circle jerk to say, oh, many worlds has to be correct because Bell's inequality makes it, blah, like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand any of it, but it seems like it's the why, like the why
Exactly.
behind it. Are we going with Copenhagen or oh God, what the hell's his name? Blitz is a fan of the alternative one. Now I can't
I think
remember what
it's
the hell it
the
is.
many worlds theory. The not
Yeah, but
Kessel.
there's a name
Yeah,
attached to it, and I can't remember who the hell it is.
it's the guy that wrote the original paper. Um, one sec, because it will bother me if I don't remember it.
Somebody in the chat's gonna get it for us if
Background.
it's the one Sean Carroll subscribes to, but not Blitz. Or sorry,
The
and
Everett
Blitz.
interpretation.
Yeah, the Everett interpretation.
Yeah.
Professor Nixie doesn't like Everett.
Do you ever watch Sabine Hosenfelder at all?
A little bit.
Okay, her channel. I'm starting some shade now. Her channel's gone downhill big time over the last like 6 months.
Blitz was saying something similar to that. Yeah.
She made a couple of wild videos where it's like, I'm not opposed to, I mean, obviously I'm not opposed to like science creators making videos about politics. I've got like a 6-part series on fascism, but she made some whack ass videos like one after the other. And I was like, ooh, unsubscribe. But yeah, so I've been thinking about this a lot recently, and it started from the position of trying to, assess the kind of physics side. And then I basically just arrived at the position that no matter how far I might be interested in diving into it, it's pretty clear to me that the straight up answer is we don't know yet. We don't have enough information about quantum physics or neurocognitive correlates to know, A, is the universe fundamentally deterministic? And if it is, or if it's not, is that related to consciousness in any way? But so that's led me into the more philosophy side, because it seems that in lieu of the empirical evidence, you're kind of stuck with it being a philosophical argument. So here's my hot take, if you will, against. So I'm a compatibilist. I believe that we don't know whether or not the world is deterministic, but the version of free will that I subscribe to is one that is entirely compatible with a deterministic universe, including the kind of like biological determinism that Sapolsky lays out in the book Determined. And so my argument is basically that the kind of the cosmic free will that a lot of people use for the incompatibilism argument, that determinism would negate this, just doesn't really make sense to me in terms of the way that we act and the way that we think about free will and the reasons that we care about whether or not it exists. Whereas this alternate framework does not have this conflict with determinism, yet maintains all of that utility. It still allows us to think about problems of moral culpability. It still allows us to think about, the degrees to which we might want to favor rehabilitative over punitive justice, things like that. And that's essentially, it's a pretty simple idea. It's called reason-responsive free will. So the basic idea is not that free will is this uncausal, indeterminate thing that's somehow cosmically outside of chains of cause and effect or arises from some quantum whatever. It just says that you have free will, and you exercise free will when your actions arise from some cognitive, reason-responsive cognitive mechanism that predates the action.
Right.
Most of the time, this isn't even true, right? Most of the time, we're all just kind of floating on autopilot. Half the times I get in my car, I flip on a fucking podcast. By the time I've gotten to Target, I'm like, I have been unconscious for the last 5 minutes. Like I was in my own world.
Yeah, you want to freak yourself out. Try to catch yourself when you take your phone out of your pocket and unlock the screen. Try to catch yourself saying, "Why did you do that?" And then you'll go, "Oh, Jesus."
So I actually only just came back to TikTok this last week. I took like an almost month-long hiatus without even opening the app. My home screen was literally 4 apps, and it was like text message, Slack, Discord, and YouTube. And that was all I allowed myself to do. And then I physically carried a Kindle around like a caveman. But I found that the most reliable time I pulled my phone out on autopilot was when I was taking a piss. There was something about like Checkpoint where I just whipped the phone out and I was like, I can sit here for 45 seconds and be alone with my thoughts. Like, that's fine. Maybe that's why I've been thinking about free will. I've had all this extra free time. But anyways, yeah,
go ahead.
No, so I've been talking for a while. Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say like the compatible, like I don't mean to say this in a disrespectful way, but I've always thought that isn't the compatibilist view that free will it's a vibe. That's how I've always kind of understood it.
you could so there are compatibilists that definitely have it's a vibe thing that like if you were to steel man the case, I think their argument is more that free will is an experience. So
Hmm.
the onto
You
the
know it when you
onto
see it, that kind of thing.
exactly the porn argument. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. That's
this
actually the
version of
Supreme
free will,
Court argument.
yeah, this version of free will, the reason responsive free will that was laid out by John Martin Fisher and David Lewis, which, oh boy, if you've not read David Lewis, that guy's got some pretty wild ideas. But this is a whole, we're not going to go down this rabbit hole. This is too far into the meta philosophy, but David Lewis has this sick idea called modal realism. And I hate this because, like, I don't believe in modal realism, but, like, it's the stickiest argument that I've ever heard. And it's the idea that, like, any possible world, which is to say, when we say something like if you and I were playing basketball and I were to make a shot, or I were to, just barely miss a shot, and then I say something like, I could have made that. The possible world is the world that I'm referring to, the counterfactual when I say I could have made that, which is, holding all but a few relevant facts constant. There's a world where that could have, taken place. And he has this idea that those worlds aren't, that those worlds are real, like equally as real as this world is. Not that they, that they're the ones that you're in, but that they're equally real in every sense that we care about real. Which, yeah, anyways, I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole. The reason responsive one that I'm talking about, though, just to give like an example of what that free will would look like, I can pull an example from today. I got jury summons, which sucks balls, and I have to go in tomorrow. But I'm a communist, and I've got some pretty radical ideas about criminal justice, and so I took some time to think about the moral implications of participating in the criminal justice system and what is the right thing for me to do. Should I try and get myself, basically let go of the jury service, or should I go on there so that I'm able to represent the ethics of that? And I like thought about this. I contacted friends on Discord, I called people over the phone, spoke about it for a few hours, decided, debated about different courses of action, and then I decided what I'm going to go do, and tomorrow I'm going to go do that. And so by this definition of free will, because tomorrow, after I've done this deliberation, I'm going to go act in accordance with that planning, that would be an example of free will that meets enough of a definition. And that it's actually irrelevant whether or not me doing that or me deciding that was predetermined, because it meets this sufficient condition of it was planned, then it was acted upon.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that's fine. That's like to me, and you've thought about this a lot more than I have, but to me, that describes sort of like the illusion of free will, I feel like yes, I do say things like I decided to do this, and I will plan ahead that tomorrow I'm going to do this thing, and then I do it. But
Mhm.
I don't think it doesn't address, and I'm fine with like thinking that way. I think it's has social utility. I think it's useful. I think it helps preserve your sanity, because if you actually convinced yourself of that it wasn't real, then nihilism, I feel like, would take over, which could be a bad thing or whatever.
Mhm.
It's kind of like how I always think like religious folks. I'm like, you don't really believe in the afterlife, because as Bender on Futurama once said, if I knew I was gonna have to live another life, I'd kill myself right now. Which is freaking hilarious. But anyways, I what I don't think it really addresses is the chain of events that actually caused, let's just say, that mental state you had to plan ahead, or what's causing that state in the future for you to plan it. Because if I make the decision that tomorrow I'm going to do this, then I don't really freely do it in the future. It was determined by this decision, kind of, in a way. But then where did that decision come from? Like Sapolsky says this in his book a million times. He's like, show me the neuron that fired without being stimulated by anything else ever in
So
its in the chain of events or whatever,
yeah.
that type of thing.
So here's the problem I have with it. So I understand the rebuttal, but it's one that essentially takes the idea I'm advocating for, then adds this additional condition of like cosmic uncausality. But like, I don't even think that idea, like, regardless of whether or not the universe is deterministic, let's take for a hypothetical that the universe isn't deterministic, and that quantum events can scale to macro level without decohering or whatever you want to view it as. I still don't think that version of free will even makes sense. This kind of cosmic free will, because if you think about it like this, if free will is action that is predicated on desire, then it sounds like Sapolsky is kind of a fan of the Schopenhauer, you can do what you will, you just can't will what you will view of, like, that's not under your control. And that's fair,
Yeah.
but think about it this way. If your actions are predicated on your desires, and your desires are predicated on any amount deeper than them, the neurobiology, the chemistry, the physics, the whatever, however deep you want to go with it, that's fine. But like, in that case, it seems like that kind of free will is begging to be uncaused, in which case I say that's just random. Like, in other words, if I try to simplify it, desires are always either going to be causally connected to something, that you have a reason for doing things, or you have no reason for doing them. They're causally disconnected. They're quantumly random, in which case I would argue there's still not much of a desire. So regardless of whether or not the universe is quantum, it seems like that version of free will, even in a universe that's, non-deterministic, still doesn't make sense because it's fundamentally random. You didn't choose them, it just randomly happened.
Yeah, I don't subscribe to the second thing. The first point you made makes way more sense to me. But I wouldn't call it free will anywhere. Like, because it get like a lot of people, like, I'm not accusing you of this, but a lot of people confuse the idea of if it can't be determined, then that means that it's free will. It's like,
Right.
no, because like what the hell are those things called? The where you have like a row of cubes, and then some of them are shaded, some are not, and then the next row will be shaded in accordance with a simple rule that if this one and this one are shaded, then the one below it will not
like
be, or
those
whatever.
cell games, like Game of
Yeah,
Life.
and then you get the whatever his name is, Game of Life.
Yeah,
from that.
cellular autonoma. That's what those are called.
Yeah. And so those things are, you can play that Conway's Game of Life. Thank you, Nils.
Yeah.
You can play that game, and it's fundamentally it can't be determined. It just simply cannot be. But every single time you run it, it always produces the exact same outcome. So
Wait, I'm sorry, how is that not determined?
it can't be predicted. There's no mathematical way to predict what the pattern in the end will be.
Okay, so
It's impossible.
Yeah, so there's a bit of a disconnect happening here. I've programmed cellular autonoma before. They are deterministic. They're not what's called short path calculable. So there is a way they are determined in that they will follow strict chains of cause and effect from beginning state, like that thing where you have an initial configuration and it always produces the same end state. That's the only condition for determinism. The thing with those games is that we don't have like an easy way to calculate them. Like, for example, prime numbers are determined. They're determined by the way that we define a prime number, but we don't have an easy way to calculate them. Yeah. Maybe that's a pedantic offshoot, but I get where you're going with that.
All I was trying to say is that they are fundamentally, you can't build an algorithm that will tell you what the end state will be.
Correct.
You cannot know what the final, like, you can do it with a 10 by 10 row of blocks. You cannot know what the 10th row will be unless you allow the sequence to play out. That's the only way. But it will always play out in the exact same way. Sapolsky does that argument in his book. He talks a lot about those. Because I'm just saying this because I think a lot of people think that indeterminacy equals free will or whatever, but it doesn't. We can live in a universe that is either fundamentally random or indeterministic, and those two things aren't the same thing either. But that doesn't mean that free will exists. That was the only point I was trying to make. I'm not saying you were saying one thing or the other. I was just trying to sound smart.
You're good. You're doing a good job. The kind of, I guess, thing I would say in response to that is that like, my problem with the kind of cosmic free will that people base the incompatibilism argument off of by requiring this kind of cosmic freedom is that like basically if your decisions are not on like an undetermined like a quantum level, but like if your decisions are not predicated on some reason for doing something, even if we take it at the level of the abstract, like my reason for doing this is that it will result in less pain, right? That's like a reason. So then that desire is driven causally by something. And then you could say, well, the reason for that pain is this, blah, 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 and it's always going to boil back down to some fundamental precept. So like either that is happening, in which case what we call that is logic, that's what reasoning is, or you're not doing that, and then the things are just you're randomly making decisions, in which case that doesn't seem to me to really meet that condition of freedom. So the main point I'm trying to make is that this kind of cosmic free will doesn't even make sense in a non-deterministic universe. Like, in other words, I don't know what a possible world would look like where the conditions of this, or not your, but this hypothetical cosmic free will could be met. So the argument that I'm making is we agree that, under your view, free will is like a useful fiction. Under my view, what I'm saying is I agree with you. Well, instead of it being a fiction, we already, like my version of free will, reason responsive free will, it interfaces perfectly with all of the higher level reasons we care about it. It plugs in perfectly to conversations about moral culpability, about rehabilitative justice, about free causal agents interacting in each other with the world. You can build moral systems off of it. So basically my argument is, let's use this reason responsive framework. Then we don't have to say, well, it's fake, but let's do it anyways, because you can define it in a way where it's not in contradiction with determinism, because it's simply enough to say, the other thing, to go like one spot off this that I think was kind of a clicking point for me. One of the things with incompatibilism, right, is this idea that like actions, other words, the cosmic free will doesn't exist to an incompatibilist because you were not free to do otherwise, right? And there's this really interesting type of thought experiment called the Frankfurt case, which is this whole set of thought experiments where you have some agent and you construct a situation around them where they choose a course of action, but they couldn't have not chosen to do it. But we would still say, and in pretty much all of these cases, that like they're responsible. So I think like the easiest one of this is, imagine that you have three people, Alice, Bob, Charlie, ABC, right? Bob has a chip in his head that has been put there by Alice. He doesn't know anything about it. The way that this chip works is it's like a Neuralink type thing. If at any point Bob starts to desire something which diverges from what Alice wants, then the chip will flip on, change his brain chemistry by stimulating neurons in a different pattern, and then bring him back into alignment with what Alice wants. But
right. It's like a simple version would be every time he tries to turn left, he gets zapped and turns right.
Exactly.
Okay.
But if he turns right of his own accord, like the chip won't interfere. It only interferes when he begins to digress from the path that Alice has chosen from him. Alice wants Charlie dead. So that's the setup for this whole scenario. The Frankfurt case is that Bob, completely independent of Alice, meets Charlie, dislikes him, gets into a fight, and decides to kill him of his own accord. The chip never activates, and pretty much everyone would agree Bob is morally culpable for having killed Charlie, right? But in this scenario, it is not physically possible for him to have not killed Charlie. The difference is that we care whether or not the process of killing Charlie originated from his own cognitive mechanism, or if it was something that was externally interfered with by way of the chip and by way of Alice. So these kind of thought experiments seem to me like a compelling argument that the ability to have done something different isn't really necessary to like assign moral culpability to somebody, as long as you can make the argument that they were in a clear state of mind and they made this decision under a semi-rational terms.
Okay. That reminds me a lot of the arguments against knowledge being a justified true belief. Have you heard the thing where the guy has 7 coins in his pocket will get the job? Yeah. Doesn't that sound like the same thing?
It's very, very similar. Yeah.
And,
those even have a similar name too. It's something like a Frankfurt case.
For those of you that have no idea what I'm talking about, the idea goes, if we define knowledge as a justified true belief, here's like an example where that becomes betrayed. You go in for a job interview and you interview and the person says, okay, look, you knocked it out of the park. You're everything we're looking for. We have to go through the rest of the candidates, but the job's going to be yours. And you're like, cool. You go into the lobby and you fumble around with the change in your pockets and you can feel that I have a quarter, a nickel, and a penny. So you have 31 cents in your pocket. So you develop the knowledge that somebody who's going to get this job has 31 cents in their pocket. But then the next guy goes in there and, I don't know, bribes them with $1 million. And he gets the job and happens to also have 31 cents in his pocket. So did you know that the person that was going to get the job had 31 cents in their pocket? That's the idea. There's another one about like a horse in a field. Um, I
Yeah,
hear those.
without-
I mean, they're interesting. I don't really know necessarily that they're all that interesting because I think they just kind of like that question that the person who will get the job has 7 cents in their pocket is just kind of a low resolution truth. Because yeah, like it was true, but it still wasn't you, right?
yeah,
I think the problem of the famous case with the swans and the problem of induction has this. I don't know. Like I was thinking about the problem of induction the other day, and I was like, isn't this just the really uninteresting fact that the future hasn't happened yet? I was like, I can't be smarter than all the philosophers in the world. I know I can't be, but I'm like, I'm just sitting here going like, isn't that actually what the argument is? Because I was thinking about the black swan thing. I was like, yes, or the white swan thing. Like, yeah, you can never justify that all swans are white because any future whatever. And I don't know if I'll be able to remember this whole thing, but I typed it out in a long post I wrote on my YouTube channel in response to a video I uploaded where I knew people were going to criticize me for this. But I was like, I mean, like that argument against it sort of it ignores what we actually do know. Like we know why swans are white when at the time that argument was made we had no idea. And if a black swan in the future would appear, we know in advance what would be responsible for that from like a standpoint of like gene expression or a mutation or
yeah.
whatever. So I feel like it's an interesting gotcha, but only because of like a low resolution like framing of what we're talking about.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, so the examples that you were just talking about, the 31 cents and the horse on the hill, I originally heard it with a wolf. These are called Gettier cases.
oh
Um,
yep, that's right.
yeah, and
I learned them from
I
Alex
agree.
O'Connor.
I often also find these like uncompelling, but mostly just because all of the example of the Gettier cases that I find, it just seems pretty clear to me that you weren't sufficiently justified in the belief. Like it is true and
Right.
it is a belief, but your justification was like unbelievably weak. Like I don't think that a rational person would arrive at the position the person who will get this job has 31 cents on. And if they then found out that like it was coincidence, so like actually there's a one solution that I've heard for these is the JTB minus L theory, which is that um, that knowledge is justified true belief minus getting lucky, which
Oh, nice.
yeah,
Yeah, I
which like
like
that
that.
seems pretty robust to me. But I don't know
I
that
mean,
you would
I don't
need
believe in
this.
luck, but yeah, that
Yeah, yeah.
works.
Um, so I think that's because in all those cases, it's like you were wrong. It's like it's the student that takes the math test and then just completely fucks up the equation, but they make two errors that cancel out and they get the right answer anyways.
Yeah, use the wrong formula, but you get the right answer.
Exactly. So it's
Yeah.
a very similar thing.
Or when you're debating with a flat earther, sometimes they use the right formula but get the wrong answer. That's always hilarious
True, true.
when
The
they
thing that
make their arguments.
gnaws at my soul is every time that I hear a flat earther talk about the curvature of the Earth, and then they give you a parabolic measurement, and I want to reach through the screen and strangle them.
The 8 inches per mile squared thing.
Yeah,
I need to make a PSA for this for the people that defend the globe because we don't do a good job of describing to these flat earthers why what they're saying is stupid. Because like it's always like, yeah, I mean the 8 inches per mile squared, it's accurate out to like 200 miles, and the globe people like me, the shills, we're just saying like, yeah, it's a useful approximation. So what? But here's the problem with this. Oh man, I feel like I pretty much have to have a drawing of this. So luckily, I keep pens and index cards near me because I have to draw pictures for the idiots too. So I will do that right now.
honorary idiot here, everybody.
No, 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 no. That's not what I meant.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Okay, So that 8 inches per mile squared thing, it describes the rate of drop of curvature from a tangent line like
Right.
that. That's what it describes.
Mm.
But the problem is the flat earthers use that and they say, look, out at a couple miles away, I should see this much obscurity, and I don't. But that's not because they're assuming that the drop begins where they are standing. And this is the
Right.
thing that people on my side don't recognize. No, that would only be the case if you literally go like this to the ground and are peering at it
Yeah.
at ground level. You're up, so that tangent line is actually going to intersect at the horizon. So the 8 inches per mile squared doesn't actually start until the horizon, which if
Yeah.
you're just standing up, is going to be about 3 miles away if you have a smooth level surface or whatever. So that's the thing that we need to get right, because I know the flat earthers don't get that.
Right.
It's a simple concept for a simple mind, and we need to. That's how you decimate that and tell them that you're not accounting for. Basically, there's a head start that you're not accounting for.
Yeah.
So
This is related to that. This is one thing I find very interesting. I think people underestimate how much the effect of like optics out to the horizon can be affected by something as trivial as a 6 foot human height. The Burj Khalifa Tower in Dubai, which is of course a very Arab country, the Islamic Council has had to rule on when the Ramadan and these different Islamic religious holidays begin and end fasting, because the sunset is like 7.5 minutes later at the top than it is for the bottom. And so as you ascend the floors in the Burj Khalifa, there are like sign markers for where like different parts of Ramadan start and end.
yeah, yeah, it'll be whatever plus 7 minutes or whatever.
Yeah.
There's a I can't remember what it is, but there actually is like an official Islamic rule for when they're in space because it's
Yeah.
impossible. And I think they basically say just try.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
It's something like that. Like just try. The funny like what's kind of funny about this is um if I wanted to be a troll and an asshole, I could say Islam is a flat Earth religion because if Earth is a globe and you're on the opposite side of the Earth, well then you'd have to do a handstand to point to Mecca, but otherwise you're not praying to it. You're just pointing a line out there into the universe. So I'm not saying you should say that. I'm just saying you can say stuff like that if you just kind of want to be a little bit of a dick. But yeah, I've been wanting to. I need to like develop it, but like for if the Earth were flat, then if you like even a flat Earther would agree that east is 90 degrees of west, right?
Right. You're talking about a triangle.
But on a flat Earth, if you do that, you will move southwest.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, or like there's the thing where
but,
one of the things about a sphere or an oblate spheroid, if you want to be pedantic, having like a curved topology is that you now have the ability to get right-angled triangles, right? You can
yeah,
have a three-sided shape where all sides are 90 degrees. You couldn't have that on a flat Earth. And then pilots do this all the fucking time. They have to account for that. And so yeah, I don't know. I love when flat earthers are like, oh, pilots can't do this, whatever, and then pilots do that, and they're like, yeah, they'll just
why
always
doesn't
invent a new reason.
why doesn't the plane constantly nosedive to accommodate for
Yeah.
the curvature of the Earth? That's in the book. I did the
Okay. Yeah.
math. Over 10 kilometers, the plane would have to tilt down like 0.04 degrees or something like that to accommodate for the curve. So it's like even if this was true, it would
You
not be
wouldn't
a
know.
constant nosedive because you idiots have no sense of
Yeah.
scale or magnitude or anything. Another really because it would just be an absolute checkmate for them would be you'd have to figure out some sort of way a system or like some evidence for this, and it wouldn't be that hard to get. But as you travel south in the southern hemisphere, you get closer together if you
Yeah.
travel along a meridian. So you could just get two airplanes and prove that that's the case, because that can't be the case if the Earth is flat or the
Yeah.
existence of the magnetic South Pole. There's that
Yeah.
too, but that wouldn't make any sense. So
It's what's the whenever you I respect your resolve for arguing with Flurfs and people of similarly low aptitude, science aptitude, because I um once I figured out that quite often you cannot use reason to get somebody out of an argument that they didn't use reason to arrive at, I've just lost so much of the motivation to continue to fight that fight like one on one. And like I also completely separate to that went through like I went through a pretty long period, a multi-year period of like deconstructing and then reconstructing my own beliefs, which is, of course, when I got into philosophy. That was the thing that actually began that. Was I noticed like that's what a coincidence. All the shit I believe is all the shit that my parents believed. That's pretty neat.
yeah.
Um,
What? You can put religions on a map? What?
Shocker. So like I did a whole deconstruction reconstruction thing where I began with like pretty basic epistemology and moral philosophy, and then I started building back up from there. I don't think you can like Cartesianly reconstruct an entire person without ever having to take some things as just all right. We'll grant that that's true. Because like I don't think in at least in the absence of a god, I don't think that you can build up objectively build up beyond the kind of I think therefore I am level of skepticism. But like I'm just willing to grant that there are it's what they call hinge epistemology. Like I'm just going to grant that my senses are generally but not always reliable ways of ascertaining information about the world, especially if we can aggregate between multiple people. Um, and if I'm a brain in a vat, then goddamn, this is a pretty impressive vat. Um, but as part of all that, I had a place I was going with this, and I've forgotten it. So I'll relinquish the floor.
That happens to me more often than it should.
Yeah.
Talk myself into wait, where was I going with this originally?
Yeah.
Um,
I was talking about
hey, what was the science series that you were part of? I remember hearing about
Oh,
that, and it was before it came out. But then I totally never somehow.
yeah. It's called Oddly Satisfying Science. It is already on CuriosityStream. The host was an awesome YouTuber, Nick Uhas, who actually we've become great friends. We totally hit it off. Actually, I got a great story about Nick that I'll tell if you'll permit, because I think it's a funny story. So we were filming this show, and the show was Nick was the host, and then there were a bunch of co-hosts that they brought on that were like, science creators like me who would do a couple of episodes. And I think I'm in 6 episodes of the show. And I have experiments in all of these episodes where the format of the show was basically that I would conduct an experiment, I would show Nick the results, and then we'd talk about the science of why. So, like a pretty standard build out for a science show. But they were fun, and we did a lot of different things. I did the board with the sand grains where you play a tone through it, and then they'll collect in the kind of standing wave note. The
Yeah.
thing. So that was really cool. We did one, just some pyrotechnic shit. Did the potassium and water because that's always a fun one, and then some. Because I have more of a background in chemistry, we did a couple of chemistry reactions where we did the iodine clock and then the raining gold thing and talked about the history of alchemy. But
Yeah, that's a lead iodide, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So they flew me out to Burbank. And like, this was such a surreal experience because like, up until this point, like my entire career being a niche internet micro celebrity was always just recording fucking videos in my garage. Please stop making noise. My
I thought
computer.
you were a Linux dude. Why am I hearing the Windows notification?
I'm sorry. I was a Linux dude. And
You
then
failed me.
I moved out of technology and or out of the tech field. I work as a cannabis scientist now. And so I've switched my main machine to Windows temporarily, though I am trying to get on to my Mac. But the way that the MacBook Pro works, you can only use like 2 good external displays, and I use 4. So I have to get the Mac Studio, and I'm not going to spend another $3,000 on computers.
Oh, I got a Mac Mini, and it's absolutely phenomenal. Those things are they are lightning fast, and I use 2 displays. I'm not sure if it'll support 4 or not.
I think the Studio will. I will eventually, like when I get my next bonus or whatever, I'll probably cave and get the Studio. But especially since I'm not buying the Vision Pro, at least on this generation. But my MacBook, whatever black magic voodoo Apple's done with Apple Silicon is crazy. Especially the new the Mac Minis. That thing.
A Mac Mini is a MacBook Pro, but
Yeah,
without a
mine is
keyboard or a
yeah,
screen. That's what it is.
yeah. Um, Wild. Okay, sorry. Hold on before I get too far off here.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
sorry.
they flew me out to New York. They or to Burbank, not New York. Put me up in a nice hotel. Had a limited driver come get me and bring me to the thing, and it was like, oh, I was like, holy shit, I feel so fancy. Also, not having to do like your own sound levels, lighting, editing, pristine. Loved it. But then the moment that was really funny was I get there, and this is still kind of at the end of the it's at the beginning of things starting to open up after COVID. And so I get there, and we I'm masked up, and then they do the COVID test because talent won't be wearing masks on set, obviously, while we're filming. And also, since I have a beard, if I wear the mask, I get the divot because I wear the fitted N95s. And so I'm doing the test, and I'm waiting in the room. The room they have me in has a door that's got like a half-inch gap under the door. And I'm just kind of sitting there on my phone. I've not met or spoken to Nick at all up to now. Like, I know he's hosting the show, but it's whatever. Then I hear him come down the hallway, and he's talking with like some production person management in the show. And he's complaining about the previous host. I don't know. I'm not going to use even pronouns because I don't want to throw shade anywhere. But he was talking about this person, and he's like, I feel like I'm having to handhold them through these segments. They don't know anything about the experiments that we're doing. I feel like I'm hosting them, complaining about all this stuff. And so now I'm getting nervous, right? Because it's like I'm taking a bunch of notes. Like, I'm the one that came up with these experiments for the show and stuff. But I'm starting to sweat a bit because I'm like, well, I hope I can do better than that. And then the whole time I'm just hearing him talking shit about this other presenter. And then I go and actually meet him. He's the nicest guy in the world. And we got off super well. And then we had great on-screen chemistry. And we have since worked on multiple things together. Him and I did a commercial for the Toyota Mirai together. And I've been on his YouTube channel for his... he did a glow-in-the-dark elephant toothpaste reaction. And I helped work out all the chemistry for that part. But that was a really wild experience that nothing has quite lived up to yet.
Yeah, that's pretty. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Um, I won't say more than this because I don't know like it's not my place to say this on your behalf or whatever. But I'm pretty sure you and I live close to each other. Like
If
only
we
a
do,
couple,
we should meet up. I
only
didn't know.
only a couple hours. Are you okay with me saying approximately where I live? That's
Yeah,
what I
go
was
ahead.
trying to. I live in the Central Valley near Fresno.
Okay, yeah, I'm extreme south SF Bay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, not too far.
not too far at all. I was having to explain this to a Swedish friend of mine that scale in America is a myth when you compare it to any other country. Because I
Yeah.
had referenced a trip. I went to Yosemite twice in the last month, and I was like, yeah, it was a really short drive. It was only like 3.5 hours. And he was like, what the fuck? 3.5 hours is a short trip? But like, I figured
That's
it'd be farther away than
that's
that.
London to Scotland. It's like
Exactly. He's like, I could get out of my country in 3.5 hours. And I was like, well, I could too if I went to the coast, but
yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
basically.
yeah.
All
Big
right.
place.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. I'll let you get on to other guests here, but I appreciate you taking me on.
No, yeah, it was my pleasure. Thanks.